You are listening to a Difference for One podcast, episode number 36.
I'm Michelle.
I'm Nicole.
I'm Charisse.
And I'm Cami.
We are the English Sisters. We come together to share life-changing methods of improvement through a variety of topics.
We hope that above all, these discussions will help you feel that Jesus Christ is making a difference for you, the one. And we also hope that our podcast will inspire you to find simple ways that you can make a difference for one. Hey guys, this is Cami, and we are all here today. Today we're going to have another conversation about healthy sexuality. So I wanted to start off by talking about ideal versus real love. I was listening to a TED Talk for one of my classes today, and the woman who was talked about how she did an article on, have you seen those things where two people will sit down across from each other and they have 36 questions or a certain amount of questions that gradually get deeper and deeper, and by the end of it, the idea is that they would fall in love. And she did this because she thought it was crazy, so she tried this. And it worked. And after that, she wrote an article about it and it went to the New York Times. It was published there, and she was not expecting to get millions and millions of views in the first month. But she did, and then she had all these people asking to interview her and were emailing her and all this stuff. And the one question they asked was, "Are you guys still together?" And she just thought it was so interesting. First of all, she said no to all of those things because it was a very new relationship and she didn't want to open it up to the world. But she just felt like everyone was asking the wrong question, because what they really wanted to know was if there was some sort of shortcut to finding this belonging or deep connection with a person. I can't remember exactly how she worded it, but basically just finding a person that you'll be with forever so that you're not lonely, right? Like that's kind of the whole point. And I mean, at the end, she said that they were still together. But it was just interesting as she talked about the world's ideas of what love should be and how we just really romanticize it rather than kind of telling people that we're all going to be disappointed. And I'd say that because of the media and the way that we really romanticize love, it sets people up for failure, I think. And it can even ruin committed relationships because we get this idea of what it should be, that it's like supposed to always be super passionate or whatever, but we don't take the time to take responsibility for what it actually means to have this connection for a lifetime with another person and make that work where you guys are unified.
This reminds me of when I was reading the Twilight series when it first came out. And a friend of mine was like, yeah, I'm not going to let my teenage daughters read that, maybe even until they're in college or after they get married. I'll recommend that they shy away from it, not because it's necessarily bad, but because it gives a false sense of what a relationship looks like. And I'm sure that there are lots of books out there that fall under that same category, but it can be really easy, like you were saying, to have a misconception. You know, like a lot of women and even some men maybe love that being drawn into a beautiful story that just melts their heart, whether that's like a movie or a book or whatever. It can give us that false sense of what a relationship looks like. And then when reality doesn't fit the mold, a lot of people give up on their relationships. I think that can be really easy to do. But then I thought of Jane Austen. If you watch the story of what her real life was like, it was nothing like any of the stories that she wrote. And she was able to fantasize about these beautiful relationships in story form when really in real life, she never did find that connection and never got married herself. So I think that's really interesting.
That's sad. We'll be back after this quick break with a message from our sponsors. So I think there are a lot of things that we can do in order to prevent these fantasy ideals from happening too much, where it's realistic and of course like it can still be blissful and happy, but there are concrete things that we can do to make sure that the true joy and connection is maintained. And one of the things that I thought of, well, I didn't think of this myself necessarily, just to reference again, I took a class at BYU called Healthy Sexuality and Marriage, and that's where I get a lot of the things that I've learned from. And in that class, the teacher talked about passions and how there are different types of passions. One is artistic or creative, another is physical passions, another is relational, and another is spiritual or intellectual. And an example of an artistic passion could be like cooking. That can be something where people find creativity in doing, or it can physical if you have any sort of crazy talents, or if you like sports or something like that. Or relational, where you have these deep passions within you to create connections with other people, or spiritual or intellectual, which is the passion that you have with your soul or God or nature or those types of things. So she talked about how it's important for us to think about our own passions and to find them and implement them into our lives. And this is like really crucial that we do it, and especially find a passion of yours that combines two of those types, as in find a passion that is both creative and physical, or spiritual and relational, physical and intellectual, or something. Find a passion that combines two or more of those types, then that passion will be enduring and it'll bring increased well-being for yourself. And I thought that was interesting because something that I personally have a hard time with is I've always been nervous, especially about having children, that once I have children, I'll kind of lose myself, or that I won't be an individual, that my whole identity will be being a mom. And so this part just really spoke to me because I want to have passions, and it kind of gave me a reason that it is really important for us to find other outlets and other identities, other ways to be creative, or other things we can talk to our spouse about besides our kids or whatever. And so just kind of knowing that that's kind of grounded in research, that was cool for me to hear. So she goes on to say that sexual passion is particularly powerful because sexual bonding is the ultimate creative passion, and it includes all four of those types. You can be creative in your intimacy, it's obviously physical and relational, and you can bring in an aspect of the spiritual or intellectual. But it is really important for us to, outside of our sexual passion that you have with your spouse, to find other passions that combine multiple of those types in order to have well being within yourself, not just in your relationship with your spouse. And then that passion will be long lasting for you, and it does give you another identity and another outlet.
That's really cool that sex includes all four of the passions. So you said they are creative, physical,
Relational.
and spiritual. That's really cool. Would you say that different types of people might integrate different passions within sex? So, like, different types of people might integrate the creative side more, and other people might integrate the spiritual, intellectual side more. Have you ever heard of that? Or do you guys think in your own lives that could be true?
I don't know, I haven't heard about that specifically, but that makes sense to me that some couples might focus on certain aspects than others. But I do think that it could be a good goal to kind of even out the areas for yourself so you can reflect on your own relationship, thinking about, hey, well, we're really good about the physical, but are we as good about the relational or the emotional? Like, are we able to figure out and work through our emotional problems before, during, or after we are experiencing the physical side? Yeah, I think like the creativity, that's something that's really difficult for a lot of people to implement, especially as you get further and further into your marriage, because it just becomes a routine and you know the things that each of you like, and so you kind of just stick to those things and don't go outside of your comfort zone. But it's really important to, especially if one of the spouses is struggling a little bit with having a need that they feel like might not being completely fulfilled, then that creativity and brainstorming with each other, what are other things that we can try, or being brave yourself and trying something new, knowing that you're going to be embarrassed and it's going to take some time before it's something that's normal. Or, you know, just talking to your spouse about what things that they might have always wanted to try but feel uncomfortable, things like that. So I think that it would be ideal for people to have a balance between all four types.
You talked about working out relational things before, during, or after the physical part. What does that look like? Like talking? Or what do you mean?
Yeah, so I was going to say working out emotional problems before the physical, but that just isn't the case for everyone. I think we talked about in the last episode how a lot of times men are more likely to be okay with having sex when the emotional aspect of the relationship isn't on par, but women are a lot less likely to be okay with that. They often feel like they need to feel okay with their emotions before they're ready to open up physically. That's really common. And so I think that both spouses can learn from each other in that aspect, where women, and this is just a generalization because it's more common for women this way and men this other way, but it doesn't necessarily mean this is the way for all women and this is the way for all men. But for women to take a page out of the men's book and choose to open up, even if that might be difficult for them emotionally, because sex is so healing in a relationship, and that can be a form of an apology. But also for men to kind of take a page out of the woman's book and realize that it's okay to break down some of those walls before the physical, and that the physical doesn't always solve all of those problems.
Have you learned anything in your class or anywhere else about the science behind why sex is so healing?
I don't know if I have a direct answer to that, but we have talked about how optimal sex includes risk-taking and vulnerability and fun, and it's embedded in a quality relationship and communication and empathy and being in sync with each other with high authenticity and transparency. And that's a whole lot of things. That's a really big list of things to work on. But that list results in transcendence, which is a really cool and big word when you think about, like, we can have a transcendent experience and also transformation, peace, and healing.
What does transcendent experience mean?
When I think of transcendence, that makes me think of heaven.
Okay, on cloud nine. I was thinking it also could be because of the endorphins that you release during sex. Oxytocin probably is in there somewhere, right? I'm acting like I know things.
Yeah, no, but oxytocin, I did learn about that. I didn't really know much about it, but it's really interesting because that is like the bonding chemical. So, like when a mother gives birth, it releases oxytocin in her body, so she feels bonded to her baby.
Yeah,
And
breastfeeding does too.
yeah, and that's the same thing in sex. And fathers can, I mean, it's not quite so biological for fathers, but they can still have that release of oxytocin, like when they're interacting with their children, holding them, things like that. So yeah, oxytocin definitely plays a part. And I still don't know if this is an answer to your question, but when I think about sex being something that's healing, it makes me kind of sad to think about so many people who look at sex as just so focused on children that it's all about, this is the way that we create a child. And that's a great aspect of it, that you get to use that for creation, but it is just a very, very, very small part of sex. The biggest reason for sex is for the bonding and the healing. And I just think that more often than not, people get it the opposite way, that it's mostly about having children with a little bit of bonding if we can get that in. And I think that's part of why older people report having a higher quality sexual relationship, because they're not thinking about the children. Once they're past that stage, then that's all that sex is. There's no fear of having children, which, I mean, let's face it, like, that's a thing for a lot of people, is the fear of children, or even just having anything surrounding children. It's just about them having their experience.
And on a similar note, when you started your sentence, I thought you were going to say it's so sad that people focus so much on the physical side of sex, even though that's a great thing. But it makes me sad that there are so many people in the world who don't know the better side of sex, of having sex over and over with the same person and getting to know that person in that physical and emotional way, getting to know the way they like things and don't like things, and being so vulnerable with the same person over and over, maybe after you just had a fight, or when you just had a baby or something and you're not feeling so great about your body or whatever it is. You are naked, just the symbolism of that. You're naked with the same person over and over, and letting go of your inhibitions with the same person over and over. And there are few things in life greater than that. to have someone that you can be that raw with all the time.
Another thought I had of it getting better, or people reporting that it gets better as you get older, is I think that the experiences that you have together as a family and all the trials and all the joys that you go through together, the experiences that you create, bring you together closer. And that, I think, makes intimacy that much more enjoyable because you've been brought together to love each other that much more. I remember 2 years ago today, my husband was having a bone marrow transplant in another state, and I couldn't be with him during that time. I couldn't visit him because I had to be home with my little kids, and he had to be isolated and away from germs and all these different things, very specific precautions. And I remember being sad that he wasn't with me. And at the same time, I thought about something that used to really annoy me about him. He grinds his teeth at night, and it is worse than fingernails on a chalkboard. And I remember thinking how much I missed his teeth grinding because that meant that he was there next to me. And so it's not always about intimacy, but I think it's all of the other things that encompass your experiences together that bring you closer. And so once he got home, that made the reunion that much more sweeter. And I think that over time, the different experiences that you and your spouse have and your family has, those experiences will bring you closer together. And some of the things that you are annoyed with early on in your marriage are gonna not even cross your mind later on in your marriage once you embrace each other, if that makes sense. And I'm so grateful for those moments.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Charisse. I also wanted to talk about bids, and as we're talking about ways that you can make your relationship better, the way that you respond to bids plays a huge part in it.
Aren't bids just when someone is trying to initiate sex?
Yeah, not even necessarily sex. It can be any form of attention. You can make a bid for
Holding hands.
yeah, or even like wanting them to do the dishes or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so bids can be emotional. It can be a verbal or nonverbal way that a partner uses to get the attention of the other person. And so there are 3 ways that the partner can respond to that bid. They can either turn towards them, turn away from them, or turn against them. And this is really difficult to recognize in the moment, and it can be really hard to do if you're feeling frustrated with your partner, especially if a couple is fighting. One partner's bid might be to seek out an apology, for an example, like that could maybe be an emotional bid, and the other partner could choose how they're going to respond to that. If they're feeling frustrated, they can choose to turn towards the spouse and decide, okay, yeah, they're right. Let's talk this out, this problem that we're having. They can choose to turn away from their partner, where they just kind of ignore them, like walking away or just the silent treatment, or against them, which would be choosing to fight about it. And since I've learned about how important it is the way that we choose to respond to bids, that has helped me to be more reflective about the way that I am choosing to respond. And I think we're all doing bids all of the time, like whether it's something for intimacy or if you want your partner to do something for you or whatever it is, but we do have the choice of how we're going to respond to that. And the way that we respond can either take the relationship to the next level, it can bring more vulnerability and draw you closer together, or it could draw you apart a little bit for a time. And so it's important for you to reflect for yourself on how you are responding to their bids. And it can be really easy to be so focused on if they aren't responding well to you. But again, this is, kind of what we've taught a lot, like with the thought cycle, how your thoughts create your emotions, which create your effort, creates our outcomes. But the point is just that we have control over ourselves and no one else.
I was trying to think about how do you balance just letting them walk all over you? Like, if your spouse isn't treating you very nicely and they make a bid for you to do something simple like, oh, can you go grab my glasses for me? I would think that the Savior would say that you should always turn towards them and do that for them. But I was trying to think about how you keep people from taking advantage of you or walking all over you if you always just say yes to their bids. Or I don't know. What do you guys do to balance that? Or what's the right answer? I don't know.
What comes to my mind is, for example, if one partner is bidding for sex, but the other partner doesn't feel like they're in a spot to open up about that, turning toward doesn't necessarily mean they're just giving into the sex because that's what their partner wants. Turning toward would be being vulnerable themselves and choosing to open up about why they aren't ready to do that. It's just something where you are choosing to work together, whatever it is, rather than ignoring the problem or fighting about it.
That's interesting.
So, just to kind of go back to what we were talking about in the beginning about creating a love that lasts, some other thoughts that I had about that were it's important in your relationship to use I statements and take responsibility for things. For example, saying, it hurt my feelings when, rather than saying, you always or you never, things like that. Like, that's destructive. Saying, like, because you did this, I feel this way.
So I think that that is something that's really important in all of our relationships, that we need to focus on the issue at hand. And I feel like in the past, in my relationship, I used to bring up like, and you do this, and you do this. And if I didn't say it out loud, I was at least saying it in my head, trying to bring upon me more proof that I was right or something. And it's not helpful. It only hurts us in the way that we think about them. And then it also just jabs at them rather than trying to fix the problem that you're currently facing at that time. And so to say, like you were saying, this hurt my feelings when you said this specific statement, rather than you always say hurtful things or I never feel love for you. The always and never statements are never helpful.
Yeah, and going along with that, in my class, we talked about criticizing versus complaining. And there's some really interesting research out there. I don't know exactly what it all says, but basically, it's really good for women to complain, like women who don't have someone to complain to. I know this sounds crazy. That's what I thought too. But it's like complaining is very therapeutic. But there's a difference between criticizing and complaining. And this is not a pass just for someone to complain all the time. But for example, saying a statement like, we don't have enough sex, that's more criticizing. But if you say it like, I love it when we have sex, could we do that more often? That's complaining. And I feel like that doesn't really sound like complaining, but I think that's kind of just the best word to explain how you should talk about like when you're having an issue, bring it up, and you can bring it up in a loving and kind way. So, another example could be how a lot of times, instead of asking a question where really what we're asking is if they care about us, we ask strict questions. So, things like if your husband doesn't come home, like if he comes home 3 hours late from work or something, your first response is, where were you? Rather than actually maybe being vulnerable with yourself and why is this something that upset you? What you're really asking is, do you still care about me? And so if you're able to evaluate beforehand on how you are reacting to the situations with your spouse, and the language that we use really does matter. And I loved in my class when she said that it's not always what you say, but it's what you don't say. It's kind of tricky because love is a word that's thrown around all the time, and we don't really know very much how to love. Like, that's not necessarily an instinct, but it's a skill.
I think it reminds me a lot of nature versus nurture. Like you learn over time what love means by how you are raised in your family, like how your parents treat you as a baby and as a child, and how you learn how to treat each other. And your interpretation of love can change depending on what you're exposed to, like media or your religion or your friends or your parents or siblings, whatever. And the type of relationship and experiences that you want to have need to have effort behind them. That's what I think.
Yeah, it probably is nature versus nurture, that it's a little bit of both, because I think it probably could be innate that we know how to love because we have a heavenly Father who loves us, but it is a skill that we have to develop and fine tune all the time.
I also think that the person that you love is going to have different quirks than somebody else you would pay attention to and show your love toward. So no matter who you marry, each person is going to be an individual person. And so how you guys communicate love, like the different 5 languages, that's a really fun one because people receive and give love differently. You learn how to love them in the way that they understand love and receive love so that your relationship can grow closer.
Yeah, and I think it's also important not to base your relationship off of emotions because emotions are really erratic and they change a lot. So that's kind of like how I was talking about the passions before, making sure that you have common interests. There's a debate about whether birds of a feather flock together or opposites attract, but there is really, really strong science to show that birds of a feather flock together. People like people who are like them more than people like people who are opposite of them. And so finding common ground with your partner and exploring things that you both like to do, that's also a great idea to keep that romance alive.
As far as that debate goes, I feel like both can be true. That we do want to find someone, for example, we want to find someone who has a similar parenting style to ours. Like, I wanted somebody who really, really loved kids a lot because I really love kids a lot and wanted to have a lot of kids. But maybe I needed someone who was better at one part of the parenting stuff than I was, like where I'm better at dealing with the deep conversations and he's better at, I don't know, fixing their boo-boos, whatever it is. Like, yeah, you have a common goal, but you might have different ways that you get to that goal. So I can see lots of ways that that's true in my marriage where we have lots of ideals in common, but we get there in different ways that complement each other.
That's true for me too. I feel like we have a lot of the same, like the family life we were raised in is really similar. Our ideals and principles are really similar, but we are completely different in a lot of interests. I was joking in front of one of the kids the other day and I was like, actually, Dad and I don't have anything in common. If you say something, then whatever the opposite of that is what I am. Like if he likes sports, I like theater. If he likes cold, I like hot. And you could say all of these different things, but we have a love of God, a love of our children, and we have some of those basic things in common, but then we complement each other. The things that I am not good at, he is great at, and some of the things that he's not great at, I am. And so I think that it's good to balance each other out.
Yeah, I love that. And that just made me think about how it's exciting and you can make it exciting to realize that you don't really know your spouse. And maybe you could experiment sometime, like if you are in if you're at a party and your spouse is across the room, you could maybe take a second to look at him and see him as more than just your husband or the father of your children, but just see him as a man and little things like that where you can like create more excitement in the relationship.
Yeah, sometimes in my head, I'll pretend that Brent and I aren't married, and it makes things more exciting. Like, I don't know, it brings back the flair that's there before you get married.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's great to like keep a variety and a mystery and like a teasing attitude in your relationship. And I think this is a good constant reminder for all of us that you can think about today being the last day of your life. How would I live it and how would I treat my spouse if this is the last day that I get to see them? So overall, it is great to have curiosity about yourself and about your relationship, about your spouse, and be mindful about it. I've talked about meditation in the past. Meditation is a great tool to use to increase your level of mindfulness. And mindfulness is super important and super helpful in a sexual relationship. You can create an ability for yourself to be amazed all over again. And you can have loving evaluations with yourself and with your spouse on, what things you can pay better attention to or where you could create newness in the relationship, things like that. So there are lots of ways to keep a relationship strong, that it's not just about the falling in love, but staying in love that can sometimes be harder. But these are kind of just some of the ideas that we had.
So we found a quote by Linda S. Reeves, and it says, "The intimate marriage relationship between a man and a woman that brings children into mortality is also meant to be a beautiful, loving experience that binds together two devoted hearts, unites both spirit and body, and brings a fullness of joy and happiness as we learn to put each other first." I have seen that in my own life as my spouse and I have chosen to put each other first instead of putting our own selfish needs ahead of the other, that we have been able to create a union of love and joy and happiness beyond what we originally expected. I hope that you had a lot of fun laughing with us today, and we will talk to you next time.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. If it resonates with you, the greatest compliment you could give is to share it with a friend who might benefit from it as well. Check out A Difference for One on Instagram for additional content. And if you have any questions, comments, a topic you'd like to hear about, or if you'd be interested in a free mini coaching session, send an email to adifferenceforone@gmail.com.